Good evening and welcome to this evening's meeting of the Boston Town Area Committee. My name is Councillor Barry Pierpoint and I'm the chairman of this committee. My vice chairman, Councillor Patsy Marson, has tabled apologies for this evening. Our housekeeping rules are as follows. Restroom facilities are available for ladies on this floor and halfway down the main stairwell for the gentlemen. In the event of a fire alarm sounding, officers will escort everyone out of the building to the nearest fire safety point in the car park. For all persons addressing this meeting, please do so through the microphone system at all times. This meeting is being recorded. Please be advised that abuse or intimidation of any kind will not be tolerated. Anyone who is deemed to breach this requirement will be warned and asked to refrain. If the behaviour persists, they will be asked to leave the meeting. We'll now move into part one of this evening's meeting and we will firstly address the preliminary items. First of all, we'll have apologies for absence.
Thank you, Chairman. Alongside Councillor Marson, Councillor Andy Izard has also recorded his apologies for this evening. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We now look at signing the minutes of the previous meeting held on the 28th. Sorry, on the 28th of September. Do I have permission from the members to sign the minutes, please? Thank you. Update on actions from the minutes of the last meeting. I'll ask Mr. Perry, are there any updates, please?
There are no updates, Chairman.
Thank you very much. To receive declarations of interest from members, are there any declarations from members? Councillor Gilbert. Would you just put your microphone on because I can't quite hear you?
I'm a member of Boston Big Local. I was at the time. Some of the grants were awarded to Boston Borough for some of the events that took place in the town over the last few years, and I remain a member.
Thank you very much. That's noted. Any other declarations? Councillor Woodliff.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I sit on the police and crime panel, and seeing as we have the police here tonight, I better declare that. Okay. You can arrest me afterwards.
Just get the handcuffs ready. Thank you very much, Councillor Woodliff, and we've noted that as well. Any other declarations of interest? Yes, Councillor.
Boston School of Mosaic, I'm a member as well. Have to declare that, yeah. Thank you.
Thank you very much and noted. Any more? Do we have any public questions or members of the public?
No questions, Chairman.
Does anyone, person attending the gallery? Oh, sorry, we're not going to go down that point, are we? Sorry. Thank you. That concludes the preliminary items. We'll now move into part two of the meeting. And for our first item this evening, I'm pleased to welcome Inspector Colin Clarkson from Lincolnshire Police, Boston Police and Lincolnshire Police, to the meeting, who will provide us with a presentation update on policing matters for Boston, and our Community Safety Manager Peter Hunt is also in attendance for this item. Welcome.
Thank you. I'll just start with introducing myself. My name's Colin Clarkson. I'm the Neighbourhood Police Inspector for Boston. I've been in role with the Neighbourhood Policing team for just over a year. Prior to that, I was the Detective Inspector for Boston for nearly 2 years, looking after serious and organised crime. So Neighbourhood Policing was relatively new to me about a year ago. It's starting to sink in now, but we've got some really good plans in Boston. We've done some really good stuff over the year, which I'll go into. I've got a presentation that I'll run through. If you go on to the first slide. I wanted to give a really quick overview of Lincolnshire as a police force and some of the numbers and finances around it, just to provide a bit of perspective around what we do and what we achieve with what we've got. And it's not I'm not looking for sympathy votes here, but it's about the realistic picture that we're working in within Lincolnshire Police at the moment. So if you look at our funding for the year, we had the lowest paid force in the UK per population for Lincolnshire. If you look at the costs at the bottom where we compare forces, so if you look at Lincolnshire, that's 45p a day per person that we operate on. The national average is in brackets in the top row, which is 59 pence per day. If you look at Cumbria, for example, they operate on 64 pence a day, but with a smaller population than Lincolnshire and the smaller increase in population over the last 10 years. If you look at the geographics, Lincolnshire on that list there is the second largest area, with still quite a small population, but least money. From a workforce point of view, we've got one of the lowest numbers of workforces per population. So the national average is 3.69 people, which is officers and staff, per, I think it's 10,000 people in the population. We operate on 2.1. Comparing that to again, Cumbria, they operate on not far from double that. So what I'm trying to say is that, you know, we're not well funded when you compare us to other forces. We don't have large workforces compared to other forces per population, but what we do is quite good. You know, we try our absolute best in what we do with what we've got. So it is quite difficult, you know, it's quite difficult to operate in, and particularly the teams that we've got. We have got quite small teams in most departments. So things have changed over the last year. I'll come on to the PTSOs in a minute. We have lost the number of PTSOs throughout the whole force. Boston did relatively okay, but we are still down on staff. So it's around trying to be effective with what we've got and the skill set that we've got, which is what we'll talk about in a moment around being focused. So if we move on then, to the next slide. So just a couple of updates in relation to significant crime over the last year or so. So we had Operation Judaity, which was a serious disorder. We had about 3 incidents where people were attacked on the street by around 20 youths. It was the MPT, the neighbourhood policing team, that resolved that really quickly. Yes, it was 3 incidents, and yes, it was quite serious. One of my PCSOs identified all 20 of those people within 3 days, which was absolutely brilliant work. So we then followed that up with 10 arrests and then 10 separate interviews under caution in the police station. Those 10 people that were arrested and interviewed were put onto bail very quickly. That resolved it. We identified the key players in that to dismantle that group really quickly, and we didn't see any further incidents. That case is currently sat with CPS for a charging decision around violent disorder or an affray offences. We had Operation Burnt, which was the unlawful encampment a few months ago. So in relation to that, we had 59 calls for service, which equated to 52 separate incidents that's reported to police. Out of all of those incidents, we've identified 21 crimes. 13 of those are viable, which means that we've got evidence, you know, from the victim themselves. That doesn't mean that we've got evidence necessarily to charge people, but as you can see, a lot of them, people wouldn't provide us with statements of evidence, which makes it difficult. So there was 2 people arrested as a result of that, and that's got what we call a dedicated SIO, so Senior Investigating Officer, that oversees that investigation. That's an ongoing investigation at the minute, and as is the Op Judaity as well. So that's the 2 main or big events that we've had in the last year, and both of those are still ongoing. If we can move on to the next one, please. So just a bit of perspective around my team, so Neighbourhood Policing Team in Boston. So it's a team of PTSOs, CBMs, which are police officers, sergeants, and myself. We're currently down by 27% on PTSO numbers. That should rise, hopefully soon, a little bit. But we're moving from 11 PTSOs, or we have moved from 11 PTSOs down to 9 on our establishment as a result of the remodel. So Lincolnshire Police had to find quite large sums of money because of a deficit. And one of the areas that was reduced was the number of PTSOs throughout the county. So it went from 91 down to 50. So that's had quite a big impact. Thankfully, Boston, we didn't see huge decreases in our PTSO establishment. So we are down, but we've still got a healthy number from my perspective. So a couple of things that we've identified recently: antisocial behaviour linked to street drinking is down 50% this year versus the last 2 years. Our PSPO enforcement in relation to alcohol in the PSPO area. So we've doubled our referrals to Pete's team. So we've gone from 22 in the whole of the last year to 44 in 6 months this year. So we've doubled our activity in half that time, which is really good. We've also got plans around the closure orders. You may have seen that a number of shops on West Street and other areas have been closed. That's joint work with Lincolnshire County Council Trading Standards. We've got a plan around that. We're going to continue closing those shops down. They are relatively easy, quick wins because the evidence that's needed is relatively low and it's relatively minimal work for police and LCC colleagues. We've also instigated Operation Plotting, which I think I presented on last time when we were looking at the crime data. So I'm going to talk about that in a moment and go into a bit more detail. We move on. So I want to be really, really clear about Operation Plotting is not the only thing that we're doing in Boston. It is part of our daily business. So the things I talk about, it is just a slice of what we're doing. So I don't want people to go away thinking that all of my resources are working on one operation and don't cover the whole of the Borough of Boston, because that's not true. The remodel that we've gone through, we have PTSOs assigned to 3 beats out of 5. We have a police officer assigned to each beat, and we have sergeants assigned to each beat as well. It's just the PTSOs that have been removed from some of the beats because of the numbers. So we can move on. So I'm going to say this Operation Plotting was really, it was started by a lady called Sergeant Kate Odlin, one of my sergeants, and she wanted to look at some of the serious violence that occurs in Boston, and some of the volume of violence that occurs in Boston. So she started it, and it started off with an analytical package that was based on serious violence in the town centre. And what I wanted to do was really look at that, because it was good. It was a really good start, but I wanted to cover the whole of the Borough of Boston, and I wanted to look at, everywhere, not just the town centre, because it's important if we're going to focus resources in an area that we're focusing them in the right areas. So I got hold of it, we restarted it, revisited the analytical data, and expanded some of the criteria that we put in there. So public opinion of Boston. People think these are comments that have come from the public on our engagements, but essentially people don't feel particularly safe in Boston. I'll talk about perception in a minute. There is a perception issue. I'm not going to sit here and lie about that. I think there's a perception issue, but there's also a reality around that as well. And there's a reason that people feel that the way that they do, which we have to acknowledge. So people do feel concerned. People don't feel like it's safe to go out in the daytime or nighttime. They're concerned about people loitering in groups. Children don't want to go. What I will say, and I'll introduce it at this point. So I live in the Borough of Boston. I've got 3 girls. My oldest one is disabled. But I'm quite passionate about Boston, and I want my girls to be in a safe place. If I'm really selfish, I could just say that I'm doing all this for my girls. I mean, I'm not, but I want them to be able to walk in Boston and feel safe. So we know what people say. The PCC does an annual crime survey. The 2023 one's out at the moment, so there's no results from that. But the fear of Boston, which is the graph on the screen there, is the highest than anywhere in Lincolnshire. And if you look on there, you've got Lincoln City, which is the grey bar. That's looks like it's joint second from the bottom. So people think that Lincoln is relatively safe, whereas Boston is that outlier. It sits significantly above all the other areas. So there is a fear of crime in Boston. If we can move on. So if we look at the crime that occurs in Boston, generally, the biggest area of crime for us is violence against a person, and that's probably replicated across most areas in Lincolnshire, to be fair. But 43% of our crime is violence against a person. Most of it is without injury. A small percentage of it is violence with injury. So, and I'm not trying to downplay it, but it is relatively low level offending. But equally, I'm quite aware that if you're assaulted and punched in the face and it doesn't result in an injury, there's still quite a big impact that will have on somebody. So if you just move on then. So when I talk about the perception, I'll explain mine in a moment. But if you go onto a website called police.uk, you can put in your area and it'll bring up the area crime stats for that particular beat. It's organised beats, but you put your postcode and it'll identify the beat that the postcode represents. So you can see there that most of our offending is, and this was run in July this year, most of our offending is violence and sexual offences. I've just shown you that most of our, out of that group, most of the offending is actually violence against a person. And I think it was 4 or 5% was sexual offences. So it's not helpful when it's lumped as violence and sexual offences together, because it doesn't tell you what proportion it is. But we do know that most of it is violence. So if we move on. So this slide, this looks at a similar place to Boston, and we don't dictate how that's calculated, but there's an algorithm that sits behind it, and there are 6 steps to identifying a similar place to Boston. So this is violence and sexual offences. So anything between the lower line, which is green, it's difficult to see there, and the top line, which is red, that is the average range. So for violence and sexual offences, per capita, so it's per population, we are in the middle of the average range. If we move on to the next slide. So if you look at violence and sexual offences for Leeds, and just remember it's per population, Leeds is relatively well above the average. And what someone pointed out to me, and I think it was the same as last time, but this is updated, but Lincoln is sat behind Leeds, above average for violence and sexual offences. What I'm trying to say, and linking it back to that first slide around the fear of crime, Lincoln has got the second lowest fear of crime in the county. Boston is the highest. But when we're talking about, there's more to it than just street-based violence, but we're talking about street-based violence. Boston is at average for that, whereas Lincoln is above average. And if we move on to the other aspect of street-based violence for Boston, which is public order, we are well below average. We're the lowest out of all the similar groups. So there are perceptions, around crime and ASB in Boston, and we'll come on to that because I'm not trying to be dismissive at all about that, because it's how people feel, and there are things that we should be doing in relation to that. So if we move on. So my background, I was a scientist before I joined the police. I'm really into stats and academic research, etc. And I've chosen these two papers. Now, Sherman on the top one there is a professor of criminology from Cambridge. Well, in fact, he's an American, but he was at University of Cambridge. He's now the chief scientific officer for the Metropolitan Police. They've never had a chief scientific officer before. But this is all around targeting resources or targeting people or places. So the first example from 1986, 3% of locations produced 50% of calls. 5% of locations accounted for 100% of predatory offences. So that was out of 323,000 calls to police. The next one, even further back in time, 1945, 18% of individuals produced over 50% of calls, crime, and 3% of places produced over 50% of crime. What that is saying is that we need to be targeted in our approach. So if we move on to the current time, so this is some work that we had commissioned for the CSP for the East, which covers anywhere from Louth down to Sutton Bridge from a policing point of view. What that graph is saying is this is measuring serious harm, so we're looking at GBH and above generally, but we're looking at the harm, not the specific offences, and we can calculate harm, which I'll talk about a bit later. 30% of all of our harm occurs in just 3% of our lower super output areas, or 3% of our places. 70% of our crime occurs in 25% of our places on the East. So a lower super output area is somewhere between a postcode and the beat area in size. But that's really critical, because actually I can, if we looked at it for Boston, I could not deal with 25% of the places in Boston. It's impossible. I could deal with 3% of the places, and I'll talk about that in a moment. So it's about focusing the resources, accepting that we can't deal with everything, but if we work in a focused way to reduce the numbers that we've got, as in the number of people, the number of places, then we can start to deal with some of those. So if we move on then. So the approach that we're taking, it's a College of Policing model. It's evidence-based, but we use something called SARA, which is scan, analyse, response and assessment. And then part of the response is looking at the offender, the victim and the location. And the idea behind that is that if you remove one side of that triangle, you resolve your problem. So it's what we call the problem solving triangle, or problem analysis triangle. So that's the response that we're taking. It's not reinventing the wheel. It's about being focused and about using a model to tackle these issues. So if we move on to the next one. So what we did in our scanning phase, and I say we've got a really great analyst called Matt Gray, crime analyst. So he looked at all the data for the whole of the Borough of Boston. So this is not concentrated on the town centre. It looks at all the crime and ASB data for the whole of the borough to decide where we're going to start doing some more concentrated work. Now, it's almost insulting to put that out, because you could plot population on there as a heat map and it would produce probably very similar effects. So we know that most of the crime and ASB takes place in the town, it's almost obvious. But what we did next, which was quite clever, or what Matt did next, which was quite clever, if we move on to the next one, we put them into little hotspots. So those hexagons are 100 metres across, and it's an aggregation of ASB and crime. So the crime that was selected was anything from ASB, including ASB, but anything from assault up to murder, but street-based. So it doesn't look at domestic violence in the home, for example, because it's about what the community feed back to us. This is around the perception and around the experience that occurs on the streets. So if we move on to the next one, so where we then took it a step further. So those hexagons there, the lighter colours, the translucent colours, hexagons, that's a volume of crime. When we look at the opaque hexagons, that's the measurement of harm. So if you commit a robbery, that'll give you a score of 365 as a score for that particular offence. That's the starting point for the number of days that you would receive in prison for committing that offence. It doesn't look at aggravation or mitigating factors. It looks at the starting point alone for that offence. So what that graph is what that map is showing us is that where we get volume of ASB and crime, we also get harm. And the only exception is the bottom right corner where you've got that hexagon, where we don't get any ASB or crime. That's the only exception. Everywhere else we get that underpinning of ASB and crime, and then we start to see that serious violence on top of it. The orange dots there, they're street safe reports. So if you walk anywhere and you feel unsafe, you can report that to the police for a national system. That could be to do with people loitering. It could be to do with lack of CCTV, lighting, just anything that affects your feeling of safety. That's not necessarily linked to an offence or an incident. That's just someone's feeling. But we get those corridors. We get particularly in the marketplace where you've got high harm, you've got volume, and you've got a lot of street safe reporting. So we tend to get them in the same areas concentrating. They are a bit more sporadic out and about, but it does back up what we're trying to achieve. So we turn that into, Pete's doing really well with this, thank you, Pete. We turn that into 4 hotspots. So we've got West Street, we've got the marketplace, we've got the Wormgate Red Lion Street area, and we've got Central Park. So that's 2.5 years worth of data, crime data that we've looked at and we've plotted. That finished the data finished in November last year. So we reran that this year and we reran it for November to May. Now so 3 of the hotspots except the park remained exactly where they were. The park completely disappeared. And at first you think, well, why is that? But we know the park's closed in the winter months. We know that there's seasonal issues in there. So what it did, it corroborated the hotspots. We showed that in the last 6 months that the hotspots remained the same, except for the park, which changed, but that was fine. So what we've got behind that, we've produced the 4 hotspots, and I'll go back to that targeting those academic papers I just mentioned. So we are targeting 0.1 of a square mile in Boston in all of those hexagons. That is a really tiny area, but it means we can concentrate resources in those areas where we'll have maximum benefit. So essentially we're targeting 1.15%, if my maths is correct, of Boston, which is really, for me, is really key because it means we can do a lot more in those areas. So behind each hotspot, we have an analytical product. So if we move on to the next one. So we've got a general overview of, and this is victims. So we generally know who our victims are, age, nationality, sex, etc. That will help with universal provision. That will help us know when to tackle or who to target in the hotspots on a general basis. Move on to the next one. Then we've got a specific victim. So we know who our repeat victims are because we're taking the offender, the victim, and the location. And actually, if we can work with victims, which we don't do as much as I think we should do, we can probably make a difference and help people. We're very careful, I would say, but become more resilient or less likely to be a victim again. So we know who our repeat victims are for each of the hotspot locations. If we move on to the next one. And we did exactly the same with our suspects. So we know the general overview of our suspects. So if we're going to put some universal provision, say, into the park, in the marketplace, but into the park, we know what age groups we need to tackle or who's likely to commit the offences, etc. And then we have an offender-specific one on the next slide. So we know who our specific offenders are and who the repeat offenders are as well. So we can start to target those people. And we'll do it in a 2-pronged approach. We're going to mimic, and I'll come to it later, but what's called the offender management programme, which is a government initiative that all forces have. And that's around supporting people. So meeting unmet needs, addressing vulnerability, etc., of victims and offenders, but with an enforcement element as well. So it's not just about support. If we need to enforce, we'll enforce. So we've got that overview. We'll have a monthly rolling report on that, so we'll know who our repeat suspects are each month over a 12-month period. If we move on. So then what we did next, we wanted to look at the location-based information. So we've got what we call a design out crime officer. He's an accredited trained officer. He's actually an ex-inspector from North Yorkshire. He looked at all of the hotspots from an environmental point of view and came up with a report for each of those with suggestions about what we can and can't do. A lot of that it will be council driven because some of it's to do with the physical location, but what can we do to change that location? So for example, if you make somewhere look and feel nicer, it has an impact on the psychology. If you're walking down a street that's really not cared for, you're more likely to get crime because psychologically it's more permissible to commit that crime because it's uncared for. So we've got one of those, again, which we've shared with the council that sits behind each hotspot. So they're quite valuable. There was a lot of generic themes that came up on the same one, things like CCTV, which we've got, but we'll talk about again a bit later. So we've got one of those EVAs for each of the hotspots. We did a community engagement survey. My team absolutely hated me for it because it was an awful lot of work, but did a tremendous job. We deployed it in 8 languages throughout Boston, in person and online. We did it over about 6 weeks, and it was about understanding perceptions and views on crime. It was understanding the actual hotspots themselves, what the community think are the issues in those hotspots, and what can be done to make those areas feel safer. So we've just got that data back and we've just got it interpreted by the crime analysts who did a lot of the initial work. So we're working through that at the moment. But essentially what we got 1,029 responses, which I thought was really good, from a community point of view and from a community voice point of view. That equates to 1 in 69 of the residents. One of the things that we saw quite early on was there's one question, and the question's not on there, but it was ASB and crime concerns me. It affects my daily activity in the home and it affects my daily activity outside the home. So most people said it concerns them. I think it was, I can't see it on there, but I think it's around 62% said it concerns them. Less people said it affects their activity in the home, but what surprised me was the number of people that said it affects their activity outside the home, and that was around 60% as well. So that was quite high, which was quite worrying, really. That people think worried and not just concerned, but it affects what they do outside the house. So it shows that we have to do work, and this is where I go back to the perception. There is a perception of Boston, but there's also work for us to do because we've got those areas of crime. We know where the concentrations are, and that's what we need to be working in to address those and make it feel safer and be safer as well. If we move on. So this was one of the slides that we just had it interpreted. And interestingly, we had, when you look at the nationality, so we had British, Polish, Lithuanian, Latvian and Portuguese all had a similar mindset when it comes to the concern of crime. And that was all around about 60%, I think it was on there. It was a little bit different for the other questions around activity in the home and activity outside the home. But that was quite interesting, and Karina O'Reilly, who I'll mention later, picks that up as well. So there are things that we need to do in relation to the community. It's not as easy as just applying one solution to all aspects of the community. So if we move on, so that's a bit messy, that chart, but essentially what we're looking at there is the victim, offender and location, the problem. So what we're going to be doing is working on the victim, we're going to be working on the offender and the location. So I'll pick up a couple of those. So the location, we're going to target illicit businesses. So if people are running a business in Boston selling alcohol that's been smuggled, or illegal alcohol or illegal cigarettes or vapes, we're aiming to close them down. We've got a list between all the 4 hotspots. We've got a list of about 51 properties or businesses that we're going to target in that time. That's a big piece of work, and it's not something that will happen overnight. We're looking at West Street, and I'm quite happy for that to be put out there. If you've got a business on West Street and you're operating illegally, we're coming after them. We're going to be closing them down. So we can obtain a closure order from the court. So it's quite a powerful piece of legislation. So I can authorise almost any premises to be closed down for 24 hours if there's ASB and crime that's occurring there. If we go take that to court, that can be extended to 3 months. But it really hits people because you've just taken that business model away because they need that physical location to operate. So our aim is to try and close as many of those as we can. So we're concentrating on West Street at the moment. We've got some activity planned around that, but we're going to try and get through that. But working the multi-agency way, so working with immigration, we're working with trade and standards, some of the internal departments within the police. Environmental changes, I'm not touching on that too much, but we've got a plan around that, working really closely with the council around that to try and look at what we can do for the environment. When we're looking at the victim and the offender, we're going to have a people panel that looks at the victim and offenders on a generic basis and on a targeted basis for where we've got repeat victims and repeat offenders. And that's multi-agencies. I'm in talks with partners around that. So I'm currently in talks with LPFT around having hopefully a point of contact who can help navigate the mental health arena, because that's one of the areas that comes up quite frequently. So we'll have a people panel, we'll have a location panel set up. So the interventions, I've just mentioned most of those. So we'll have those panels. We're going to have an adult and juvenile panel, but that's probably going to be one panel now. So my team, I've setting up a targeting team. So they've got a bespoke training plan around that. They had some training yesterday from our IOM colleagues who are police officers around support pathways. I think there's 8 different pathways of support which helps people desist from crime. So we're going to have 1 CBM and probably 2 PCSOs, maybe 3, depending on the numbers. And that's around being targeted. So you'll have 2 PCSOs on the 3 beats, so that's 6 PCSOs, and then 2 or 3 on this targeted team. So we can be really focused on what we're doing. Then we've got the location panel. So we've got obviously the Boston Borough Council, Boston in Bloom, the business targeting plan I've just mentioned. And what the police are doing from our point of view, we're doing the hotspot patrols. So there's a lot of academic research that says that if you put, there's something like 67 studies for this, if you put a capable guardian or a police officer or PCSO into a hotspot location at the right time, which we've got that demand data, for 15 minutes you can reduce crime significantly. But it is 15 minutes. Anything over that, and it starts with a detrimental effect. But there's 67 studies throughout the world and within the UK as well that evidence that. So we've got an evidence basis for that. We can move on. So this is an example of some things that we're looking at. So this is the Cambridge Harm Index. This is looking at an offender that essentially murdered somebody. That measures their harm each year. So in 2011, that's when they first started offending. And then in 2015, that person went to prison. But their harm each year increased for that 1 year. And that's a measure of the harm scores. So I'll come to it in a minute, but we've just secured some funding from the university to start looking at this. This is around, before we get to that upper point, can we intervene earlier in that? Can we identify key factors that would indicate someone's likely to commit serious harm? Because if we can, then we can intervene and we can get the partner services in earlier to prevent that from happening. So that's a little bit where that's a bit of a side tangent from operation plotting, but it comes as a result of that and the academic linkages that we've got in there. The other thing that we're looking at is, and I'll bear with me this, does visibility affect crime rates? Because, if you went back 30 years ago, the Bobby on the beat was really critical. Everybody saw police all the time. You probably don't see many police officers or PCSOs now because we live in a completely different time. 10 years ago, and the numbers I reflected on, we had just in the 1,200 police officers in 2010. We've got about 1,200 now at the minute, so we're no better off than 10 years ago. But the complexity of crime has changed significantly in that time. The amount of administrational work that the officers have to do is massively different. There's a lot more pressures on officers. So there is less visibility. So we've got a bit of a study going on with our crime analysts where we look at plotting our GPS data from our handsets, then overlay that with crime data. So we can see, if there was an officer in that area on that day, did that affect crime that occurred in that day? So we're looking at that. That's very early on. We've never had the GPS data before. We've got a new program where we get that. So that's something that we're looking at because that's quite key to visibility, because if visibility has an impact on crime or crime types, then it shows the importance of having that visibility, or at least that targeted visibility out there. So we've got an academic collaboration with Dr. Karina O'Reilly, who's a criminologist and deputy head of school at Lincoln University. She's managed to bring a fair bit of funding in relation to what we're doing. What I'm saying to my team is that we need to have an evidence base. I don't want assumptions. I don't want professional judgment all the time. I want an evidence base for what we're doing. I want to understand what's happening, where it's happening, so that when we intervene, we're maximising our impact. And we know who to target, we know what location to target. So we've got a really good link with Karina. She's a brilliant criminologist, but she's got links into other people as well. So if it's not an area of expertise for her, she's got someone that can link into. So we've got that good linkage there. So if we move on to funding then, so the university essentially have provided about £10,000 worth of funding, thereabouts, so far. We had a partnership day in May, which some of you were at, and that was bringing about 30 different partners into a room to discuss crime and ASB in Boston, but look at the hotspot locations. So that continues. We had a team away day for my team to sit down and actually look at all the data so that they could start to understand it, and for them to come up with some recommendations, because it's around all of us contributing, not just me as the inspector dictating. Karina's also secured funding from the Richards Academy to run residence workshops. She's just secured that, so those resident workshops are going to be set up in the near future. She also set up focus groups. Now, that was under my request as part of this, but independent of police, because I didn't want, if people have got things to say about police, I want them to be able to say that, but without us running that. So that will be fed back into us when those are finished. We've just, so this is a joint bid, we've just secured £6,000 of academic research to look at the crime and harm, to look at any patterns of behaviour, etc., which was really good. We've also put in, just go back one, sorry, off the back of that, we've put in for something called STAR funding, which is the National Police Chiefs Council funding, to develop that even more. That's right, £100,000, but that's a really competitive process, so we're not sure whether we'll get that or not, but we've got that really good academic link. And then the last page, so Lincolnshire County Council have the Lincolnshire Safety Partnership. They've got core priority groups underneath that, so we put a joint bid in, so police and Boston Borough Council, for various things. We got 6 of those bids approved. So we've got £28,000 for interactive display boards. That's around providing access for the community in all languages, getting community safety messages out there in the hotspot locations, so that we're accessing everybody all the time, and it's not just face-to-face things, engagements. So we've got £100,000 for additional CCTV in the hotspot locations. So that's looking at the gaps in the hotspots where we know that we haven't got good enough coverage. That's really good, because the park, for example, we've had a series of sexual assaults. I say low level, and I don't mean that in a derogatory way, but relatively low level, but we've had it, quite persistently. So hopefully we'll be able to address some of those, because one of the areas that we knew wasn't great was the coverage, but that then leads to investigative gaps because we can't identify people that are responsible. We've got £17,500 to improve the street scene. That, to be fair, I mean, I'm not going to go into any detail around that, but that number is probably significantly higher when we look at the other contributions from other people. We've got a research grant which is police only. It's going to be managed by us, but the university are going to undertake some research evaluating how effectiveness our engagements are. We've got £37,500 for community worker. We need to work out what they're doing, but that's going to be looking at things like culture, cohesion, etc. And then £122,500 for 2 community wardens for Boston, which will be, again, me and Pete have been discussing this, but it's about capable guardianship, but they'll be working in the hotspot areas, but at the times that we need them to be. So not just booking on at 9 o'clock in the morning, they'll be looking at the peak times. But all of that is based on the evidence that we've produced so far, and all of the implementation of that will be based on the evidence that we've got. So it'll be targeted and focused in its approach. That's, yeah, in total, £305,000 additional funding for Boston, which I think is really good, and I think we can do an awful lot with. And I think that's it.
Thank you very much, Inspector Clarkson. What a very interesting, informative and in-depth presentation. Thank you very much. We've certainly learned a lot about what you're doing in Boston. I just want to thank all the councillors for sending in their questions. And as you can see, Inspector Clarkson's provided the answers to the questions. And where we've had questions that's similar, we've linked them into one question. So what I'm prepared to do now is to take any questions from both the presentation and from the response back from Inspector Clarkson. So would anybody like to start the ball rolling? Councillor Cresswell.
Okay, thank you very much. There's lots of detail, which I like, and I'm also a scientist. So yeah, very good. Just there was a graph on the likelihood of crime. I don't know if you can go back to that graph. Sorry. No, that's fine. Okay, that's absolutely fine. I just wanted to know the graph of the likelihood of crime, was that based on national statistics, Lincolnshire statistics, or was that specific to Boston?
That was the. Let's just go back to it.
It was about like if they were going to prison and things.
Might be able to get on the board.
So the graph was around one specific offender, and it charted their previous offending history. So there's a model called the Cambridge Harm Index, and that is an equation of harm. So we can look at volume, which we've done. We can look at the harm as well, which we've done, and we've amalgamated. But if you, for example, if you gave public order a score on the Cambridge Harm Index, that would give you a score of 1, and that's based on the starting point for the sentence in court. Whereas a robbery would give you a score of, I think, 365, which is a year in prison. That is around that graph that I showed you was a cumulative score each year for that offending person. What we're hoping to do with the funding or with the innovation vouchers, and if we get the staff funding, is explore that further. What I haven't said about that, because we're in consultation with it, is what we're hoping to do is overlay life data on top of that. So mental health, partnership data from people like LCC, etc. Because hopefully we can see patterns to offending. So we know for that particular example, that person offended, or the harm they caused increased every year. So are there early indicators that would indicate that? So for example, it's really specific, but a change in medication for mental health, does that have an effect on crime? I mean, that's a long way off.
Any further questions?
Sorry.
Just bear with us a moment while we do the technical.
Your mic's off, Pete, yeah? Yeah.
Right,
Okay.
continue. Sorry.
Yeah, thank you. You said about that, obviously the bureaucracy and the paperwork means that less PCs are out on the streets. So when you talk about numbers of policing, does your back office, does the people, who are doing your day-to-day paperwork, and has that increased, or has that been cut? And is that another reason for that?
So if you look at the top right there, so 96% of our police officers are on the front line. The national average is 92%. So most of our officers are on the front line. There are some that don't, that do different jobs that you need a warranted officer for, but not necessarily on the front line. So, we get as much out of the police officers as we can. We have civilians that do some of that work as well, or the back office type work. But we maximise as much as we possibly can.
Thank you. Okay, one more.
Sorry. No, that's brilliant. And that's sort of what I wanted, because I noticed it on there. It was, we're getting good value for money out of them. You mentioned about community wardens and putting those in those hotspots. I just wondered, will they have any powers?
Well, that's for the council to decide ultimately. But likely be able to enforce on the PSPO, because the PSPO is yours, essentially. But we're still quite early on. We've just set up a project group, haven't we, in the last few days? So yeah, ultimately probably the PSPO, but that's up to you guys to decide.
Brilliant. Thank you.
I'd like to ask a question. Well, it's a statement really. We said on the graphs that the public opinion of the town and the borough was, dangerous and all of the things that you mentioned. And the thing is, it's a public opinion as opposed to actual statistics and fact. My concern is what can we do to reverse the sort of public's opinion of being negative and putting across a positive borough and a positive town where people are going to be safe. And I think that's the sort of key message I think that we sort of got to attack and get people to stop thinking negatively about this town.
I know it's a statement, but I completely agree. I think there is a narrative that needs to be put out there that's different to what goes out now. How you do that, I've no idea, because that's quite a difficult thing to combat, isn't it, really? And the stats that I produce, I mean, is crime underreported? Probably yes. I'm not going to deny that, but that's probably everywhere. But the stats that we've got, the crime essentially is at average or below average. Even some of the areas where I think we're above average compared to similar areas. So I think robbery we're above average for. We're still at half the national rate for it. So I do think there is a narrative issue, but I don't want to say it's just perception, because it's about experience as well. And which is why we've got the hotspots, because we know where to work, we know where we get those concentrations.
Yeah, but I think the thing to me is that we need to get organisations together to say, look, how can we all collectively get the message across, and through, whether it's through statistics, whether it's through demonstration of whatever, we need to be able to come across and start turning this negativity into positive. Because I just think, I've been in this borough for 15 years and all I know is negativity all the time, and we're just lacking that positivity. And I think somehow we just need to get organisations, the council, the police and other bodies together and think of a way. We've got a town centre strategy, all this sort of thing. Well, we need to get that message quite clear and strong, that this is not, all the things that people think it is. And how and why and when, I don't know, but it needs tackling. Thank you. Councillor Gilbert.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Gosh, what a lot of statistics, and I'm not a scientist, so I struggle with them, to be honest. But there was a time when all these statistics wouldn't have been available, and at that point, I think we had a sort of slightly different policing model, because it didn't rely on statistics and information such as you just presented us today. I describe that model as like a demand-led model, and I moved to Boston 30 years ago. And I very clearly remember the police station, because I live in Tower Street, sort of throbbing with a regular monthly disco, and all the police officers turned up and all the staff, and it was the loudest thing in the town at the time. I used to moan about it regularly, but then it all stopped. And I think it stopped because the police model changed. The police model became much more reliant on statistics, on evidence, on information like you presented today. And that's altered the way, in my opinion, policing is done. So whereas 30 years ago, the demand for policing was fixed by the crime rate, and the budget was fixed based on the demand, there came a point in public services in general, and I think it has probably applied across the piece, certainly in prison probation service it applied, and I'm sure in the health service as well, where it became much more important to manage the supply of a resource rather than just to continually meet the demand. Okay. Now, as a result of that, well, I think when that model was introduced, certainly in my experience, I did management training around all this stuff, so I was kind of there in the year 2000, learning about how all this was going to work as a manager in the public sector. I don't think anybody calculated at that time that demand would continue to rise, with the supply side model being deployed, so managers being deployed to allocate the resource to the crime rate.
Councillor Gilbert, can I suggest you get to the question?
Yeah. So I guess my question is that first of all, would you accept that there's probably a grain of truth in what I've described there from your personal and professional experience? And is there any possibility that some of the issues that relate to perception are actually rooted in the reality of that situation, where police are forced, by dint of the fact you don't have the resources, to scale back the management of certain crimes and scale up the response to others?
So,
did you get all that, Councillor Clarkson?
I think so.
Sorry, Inspector Clarkson.
I'm definitely not a councillor.
Welcome to the committee.
It's very difficult because, all crime that's reported is reviewed, by the police. Is it given the same weighting? No, it's not. It's impossible to do that because the demand is so high of the police that we can't deal with every single incident, every single crime. And some of the questions, and some of the questions that are raised in here, show that the cycling issue comes up time and time again, but it's around deployment of resources. So I could deal with cycling. You know, we could really focus on that, but then we won't be dealing with the hotspot areas. Now, so for example, the piece of work that I've done recently, and it comes back to this demand around shop theft. I don't quote me on the numbers, but we've had around 550 shop thefts this year in Boston. Now, around 360 of those have got named offenders. 110 people have been named as offenders for shop thefts. 7 of those people have committed over half of the offending for the named offender shop thefts. So I could deal with all of those crimes equally, you know, or try to, but I can't. You know, I've got to look at the demand. And actually, if I can work on those 7 people that are causing that demand to surge, I can reduce demand significantly. So I get what you're saying, you know, where we've gone from, but all the academic research, and there's a lot of it out there, shows that if you work on what's called the power few, which is the people that are causing the demand, you're more likely to decrease that demand in the long term. Now, of course, it'll always shift and there'll be something different. But even going back, so I started in policing in 2009, but going back then, if I had an interview for someone for shop theft, I'd submit a file that probably wasn't much bigger than that. Now, the file that we've got to submit has got to have what we call disclosure on it, which you would never have to do previously. It has to have redaction of material, so someone's got to redact all of that material. We are working on those types of things like auto redaction, transcription, automatic transcription of interviews, etc. But all of that demand, it's not just the crime demand, but it's the additional work that we have to do to achieve that. So we've got to be smart in how we deploy our resources. You know, ultimately, can we deal with everything? No, we can't. You know, my numbers have gone down. So people often talk about visibility. I've got 9 PCSOs that work an early and a late shift over 7 days. So it's very difficult. And so I do think the way we've gone with the demand and the software that we've got to be able to identify that, I think it's absolutely critical for us to be able to manage that demand properly.
Very quickly.
Well, my colleague over there had 3 questions.
But they were very quick.
Deny me even 2. Well, there's a couple of things. First, I mean, I think, you know, what you've acknowledged in a sense is the point that I made, that the demand is far higher than the ability of you as a manager to supply staff to deal with those problems. So that's heartening. People often comment to me. I had a comment the other day. There's a person goes into one of the shops in town, I won't name the shop, who regularly walks in, steals something and walks out. And this friend of mine said, and I said to the girl behind the counter, have you seen that? You know, he just literally walked in, picked up some item and walked out with it. She said, oh, he does it every day. Now, whether or not that has been reported or not, I don't know. Whether you're aware of that situation, I'm not going to tell you the name of the shop. I can't right remember. But anyway, so that happens. Now, the problem is, you know, you talk about sort of, you know, tackling the 7% or the 15% or whatever it is, the hard nuts to crack. But those hard nuts to crack actually get away with quite a lot of crime before the nut is cracked.
Yeah.
And the environment that they create encourages other people, let's call them the acorns, to come in and think that they can actually take advantage of that situation as well. So as a model, I mean, I have to be honest. I mean, having worked for 40 years in the public sector, as a model, I don't think it works. I think that it needs to be taken back to government and it needs to be explained to them that whilst this thing looks fantastic in theory, the actual application of it in practice doesn't work very well. I've got one final point to make, and then I will shut up. I will shut up.
Let me just come back on that point, please, if I may. So what I'm not saying is that we don't investigate all those crimes. What I'm saying is that, you know, we focus on some of them more so because, you know, so all the shop thefts that are reported will be investigated to a degree. It depends on the circumstances, depends on the evidence that's available. If you haven't got evidence of the offence taking place, then there'll be a very limited investigation. If you've got evidence of the offence taking place, then that should be pursued all the way through. What I'm saying is my approach from a neighbourhood policing point of view is to focus on those power few people on the location so that we can maximise that benefit. Yeah. That's not saying that all policing doesn't look at all the crimes that come in. Every crime or instance reported, reviewed, and the crimes recorded, it's investigated.
And one final comment.
I'm going to stop you there. I'm going to move on and come back to you in a moment. Councillor Doran.
Thank you, Chairman. Firstly, could I thank you, Chairman, for running such a tight ship, arranging for the questions to be submitted in advance and allowing Inspector Clarkson to give written answers means that we can move on swiftly. Thank you for that. I wanted to just thank Councillor, I did it as well, Inspector Clarkson. Sorry, you've been demoted twice tonight. No, I want to thank you very much. You know, that last slide you put up, you know, the fact that you've attracted £305,000 of funding, I think is magnificent, and I think is testament to the partnership working that we are doing as a Borough Council with Lincolnshire Police, with our community safety manager, working hand in glove with you and your colleagues. I think is absolutely magnificent, and let's not underestimate that amount of funding. It's huge when you look at that again, and should have a major impact on the quality of life for our residents going forward. And I hope in a year's time, Inspector Clarkson, that you're sitting here sharing some of the data that you'll have collected in that time, and especially when the project comes to an end, and that we can look at ways that we can support that going on in the next 5 or 10 years. So I wanted to pay tribute to the Inspector for that, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Anton Daly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Colin, for the presentation. It's very good. And I will be positive. Yes, because as our chairman mentioned, how to bring the positivity to the resident of Boston. And I think if we increase the patrols around the streets, which is the hot areas, I think it might bring some trust. So I think that will work. And I want to thank you as well, because now there is more patrols in the town, and I see more cars of the police driving through, which is good. People are watching it, they are seeing it. So it is something which is in reality working. The only things, for example, and I will talk about what I see in town from my position. There is a gentleman who has some mental issues, and sometimes he goes early in the morning and he like intimidate people by doing signs like he's gonna kill someone. And I report him to the police, which is they know about him. It just because you talk about tackling the crime before it happens. So I did report him. Will something be done to stop him or do something with that person? Because he came once for a coffee and I asked him and I talked to him nicely and he said, listen, I'm a musician, but I have problems, mental problems. So it's something.
I don't think we can do that individual case here. I think that's something for discussion outside this meeting.
Yeah,
I don't want to go into individual cases because
that's
otherwise
fine,
we're putting the inspector on the spot, and I
Yeah.
don't think it's fair. So I get the point, and he's got the point as well. So I think what we need to do is get the inspector to take that out of this meeting and come back to you with the answer.
Sure.
I hope you don't mind me doing that.
No, that's fine. That's
I don't
fine.
want to discuss
Which is just
individual
I'm talking
cases.
as an examples, because if we
Yes.
tackle, the issues are, it's, the start of it. So the second thing, which is I want to talk about,
Can I
which
just come back on that? Just
yeah, sure.
So one thing I didn't mention that, and this is not about police trying to push all of this away from us, but we deal with the symptoms and the signs, of deprivation, unmet need, which comes out in crime and antisocial behaviour. So the approach that we're taking around, we spoke about demand and focusing on those people, it's a multi-agency approach. The teams that we're going to have, the panel that we're going to have set up, will look at all of those needs and hopefully get people like with mental health, the treatment that need or, prioritise, etc. Within those hotspots. So it is difficult because a lot of the stuff that occurs out there, we deal with those signs and symptoms. So we will arrest, or whatever it is that we do. But there's obviously an awful lot of unmet need or vulnerability that's behind that we can't influence that much on. And that's where it needs that real partnership approach to deal with it.
Could I ask you to take up the situation for Councillor Danny?
Yeah.
And then perhaps you could go back to him at some point and give him some sort of steering on what's going to happen.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Can I come back? Just one more thing.
Just one more. Okay.
Oh, we are not allowed to have only one thing. It's only Emma can have 3.
No, we're not. I'm trying to get around the table as
I'm
best we
gonna have a
can.
week next time.
Go on, I'll let you have one more quick one.
Just the other thing which makes people uneasy in the town is the speeding. Are we tackling the speeding in town?
So I don't know. I don't know what's been reported to us in relation to that. I'd have to look at it. So again, if you come back to me afterwards, I do know, and I'm talking like, very generally here, that there are a lot of issues in the community that are just not reported to us. Some of it, particularly on speed, and sometimes it's perception, and we've proven that several times where people say people are speeding, but then when we actually go out with a speed gun with them, and we say how fast that car's going, they'll say, I don't know, 90 miles per hour, but when you show them the gun, it says 50, and it's it's on the national speed limit. So, but that's not to say that we won't tackle it. And the same with things like cycling, but we need that evidence base. We need it to be reported to us to be able to tackle that. So, but yeah, come back to me about that, and I'll have a look.
Thank you very much. Could you switch your microphone off, Councillor Gilbert, because it's on and it might get feedback. Can I go into Councillor Sandeep Ghosh now?
Thank you, Chair. And thank you, Officer, for this informative presentation. My question is, you mentioned about 3% of the area is actually covering 25% of the real incident, and you narrow it down to the hotspot locations. Are we considering the time of the incident so that we can narrow it down further?
Yeah. So the analytical package that we've got. Scroll down. So these analytical packages that we've had done, it's not on this one, but we've also got the time element of that. So we understand, when it occurs, what months it occurs, and the time as well. So, for example, Central Park, we know that in term time, most of our incidents are around 3 p.m. We have a peak at 12 lunchtime. We have a bigger peak at 3 p.m. and then we have another one at 7 p.m. So our hotspot patrols that we do, we've got 4 patrols per day. We aim to do all of those. It depends on staffing. They're all around those times, for each of the hotspots. And we're working with Haven High. We just started to work with Haven High around the park as well, because some of it's around capable guardianship. It's not about police, and I'll try not to go on too much, but I went to an evidence-based policing conference last week, and there was a DI from Leicestershire that presented on hotspots as well. They found that if they deployed community outreach workers in the hotspots, so the same time parameters, but for 40 minutes, they had a reduction of 30% of crime in ASB. So it's not all about the police, it's not all about visibility from the police point of view. Capable guardianship is around having someone, an authoritative figure in uniform, generally in a place where it happens. So the park, it could be that your groundskeepers are in the park at 3 p.m, with some sort of uniform. I'm not suggesting that you need to do that, but that's capable guardianship. That deters ASB and crime. So yes, we do take into account the time, and it is important.
Thank you very much. Councillor Gleeson.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, my questions were 5 and 6 on the list. I'm happy to accept that question 6 was most slightly unfair. I did prepare it actually when we were meant to be having the Police and Crime Commissioner and an ACC here, but they seem not to want to come. So turning to question 5, yeah, I think we had a slightly political backache or something. Anyway, turning to question 5, the point I was trying to highlight with this is, I actually think you're working miracles here. I'm not, my approach, I'm not criticising what you're doing. I'm amazed you're actually able to do anything. If you look at these figures, just allowing for the growth in population, Lincolnshire should have 80 to 90 more police officers than it's got, and we shouldn't have lost the community support officers. So I don't think people sometimes realise how thin the blue line we have. And just quickly, when I was previously at council, I was at a meeting where there was a sergeant and a constable addressing the meeting. Radio goes off and they apologise, have to leave because they've got to go to Peterborough to pick up a prisoner. And according to them then at the time, there was only one police officer left in Boston. So, tonight, how thin is the blue line in the town?
So I can't give details of officer numbers for sensitivity purposes, but it is thin. Demand is through the roof at the minute. The response officers deal with an awful lot. The neighbourhood policing teams, we're dealing with a huge amount as well. So it is hard. We do the best that we can do, and I think we do really well, to be quite honest, with what we've got. The numbers. I'm not. You look at 2010. We're more or less the same as we were back then, but the complexity of crime has changed significantly in that 10 years, or just over 10 years now. So it is thin, but policing, like from a national perspective, changes, you know, and we do move with time. So like I mentioned, like the auto redaction, you know, you might have a PDF file of 20 pages that you've got to redact sensitive information from. So nationally, they're looking at programs that can do that for the officer, which will free up significant amounts of time. So yes, we are busy. You know, yes, it's got more complex, and it is thin. It's very thin at the minute.
So as a follow on from that, is there anything that we, as what is the parish council for Boston, you know, and with a little bit of money, but not a great deal of money, is there anything that we can do, you know, specifically to help?
So I think when we look at the hotspots where we're concentrating on the crime and ASB, it's around that capable guardianship presence. You know, it's around that multi-agency work. We can't just rely on us, the police, to be there all the time, because we're not going to be. You know, I've already said to you, I've got 9 PTSOs that work over 2 shifts each day, over 7 days. So that those quick wins, or I say quick wins, you know, the outreach workers, it's having that presence in the community. Hopefully with the wardens that we've secured money for, that will have an impact. And then thinking about the environment, which is a separate topic, you know, environment plays a massive role in crime, and people probably underestimate it. If you walk down the street and it is really not cared for, you are more likely to be a victim of crime, because people feel subconsciously that you've got a yes to be able to commit that crime. If you walk down somewhere that's really cared for, you're less likely to be a victim of crime. I mean, that's very, very superficial, but there's a lot of academic literature behind that. So as a council, that's something that you might want to think about, because we can't influence that as the police. We've got no control over the physical environment.
Thank you. Councillor Gilbert.
I won't exhaust your patience with another one. Okay, so this is the last one. Yeah, I mean, and I keep bleeping. I can't turn my phone off. I do apologise.
I thought you got a digestion. Come on, carry on.
There's 2 things I'd like to say. But one is, you're absolutely right. I mean, the context of crime is very critical, and the environment in which crime occurs is very critical, as you said, Inspector. And I break environmental down into the physical environment, the place, if you like, and then there's a human environment, you know, who it is that you're actually having to deal with. And I think factors over which you have no control, and factors over which we have no control, is the sort of this slow decline in the quality of the physical environment, because over the last 30 years, Boston has changed physically in terms of the composition of the town centre. So a lot of people have moved out and others have moved in. There's nothing inherently wrong with that. But in terms of the sort of the human environment, what I notice as somebody who walks around town at night, well, in the evening occasionally, is that there's a lot of youths around. So I have actually been threatened as well. I sort of dealt with it quite a straightforward way. Just told this idiot to go away, and he did. But what you do notice is there's very few what you might call normal average Bostonians out at night. So you do have a preponderance, in my opinion, of people who might be sort of forming
What's the question? I'd like to know what the question is.
Intimidating groups.
Can you get to the question?
Well, I mean, I guess the question is there anything, given the fact that you have no control over that sort of situation, is there anything that you think as a community we can do to improve the situation, to make it people less inclined to feel anxious about the town that they live in?
That's almost impossible for me to answer, because you know, we're talking
maybe
about
it is. Maybe I was just wanting to get that point across.
What we're talking, no, I accept it. You know, I'm not saying that that's not reality, but what we're talking about is, say, groups of people where there's no antisocial behaviour, where there's no crime committed.
Yeah, I agree.
We've got no control over that at all, have we? And that's a really wide issue, and that's something that needs to be spoken about. Really, is that cultural side, but that's not for us to do.
Thank you. Last question, and that's it. Councillor Saviak.
My question is there anything in the plan, especially, you know, we have phone number 101 or 999 to report things. Is there anything like program, system, or way which we can report quicker, especially as I am working in employment agency 12 years and a business owner as well. I don't want to sit on a phone for at least 1 hour if there is somebody urinating or drinking. Is there anything in the plan like QR codes or something? Take a picture quickly and just send it to police station?
So the 999, I don't know, is it in the questions? I submitted, I got some information from the FCI around it. It isn't there. So question 15 was around, or partly around that. So from a 999 point of view, Lincolnshire Police is consistently in the top 5 in the UK for answering 999 calls. 101 has been problematic for quite some time because we haven't had enough call handlers. We should be seeing by the end of December, hopefully bigger changes in that way. It's reduced wait times on the call. There's likely to be always going to be some time that you have to wait because it's the lower priority calls that are coming through. But the alternative is to report it online. So you can report it online. If you go onto Lincolnshire Police website, you can report crime or ASB if it's not an emergency call. So that will go through the system. We'll collect the same information and resources deployed in the same way.
So do we work with the businesses closer? Like, do we give them leaflets or parks where they can report things? As like I said myself, I never knew that we can do that online.
So, it's something probably to look at. To be fair, do you know how much reporting online we get in Boston? And I can ask that question because we can certainly promote it. But it is there for everyone. It's available. It's been there for quite some time. To be fair.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Inspector Clarkson, for coming this evening. Thank you for doing all the answers to the questions from all the councillors and the presentation. Really do appreciate you being here this evening, and we really have been a very interesting and informative discussion and evening.
I wondered if could I just ask a quick question before? No, because
the questions are all empty.
Oh, right, well, I'm sorry.
We're going to move on. We could be here all evening. Thank you for your time. Safe journey home, and thank you all the councillors for putting all the questions in previously. Thank you. We're going to move on to second item of the business in the evening. This is the annual report. Oh, we're just changing chairs, are we? Thank you very much, Peter, as well. Thank you. Thank you. Just want to do a bit of musical chairs. We'll wait till everybody's settled down and then we'll carry on. Right, as I was saying, our second item of business is the annual report of the BTAC events budget for the forthcoming year. This is on page 7 of the agenda, and I'll ask the portfolio holder, Councillor Dale Broughton, who is supported by our interim cultural services manager, Rachel Rowett, and also events manager, David Worthington. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good evening, fellow councillors. The report I'm presenting this evening provides recommendations for the 2024-25 events programme and includes budgeted financial breakdowns to support the committee in its deliberations. There are 2 options to present to you this evening. Option 1 is for a limited programme of events, which is proposed to be delivered within the baseline budget for 2024-25 of £41,500. This is broken down for you all on page 15 and 16, Appendix A on your report. Option 2 incorporates the larger scale events in addition to the existing community-based events, which have shown to be very popular and brought good footfall and benefits for the town. This option includes a Boston Big Local Legacy and Music Festival, which will showcase the tremendous work Boston Big Local has done for the town over the last 10 years, with their funding unfortunately now coming to an end. Due to this, the Boston Beach event, which has always proved popular with families and bringing the community together throughout the summer weeks, has been added to this option to be considered by BTAC. Also in this option is a proposed ska and reggae festival, which will be the first in Boston and bring something new to the town for the residents and their families to enjoy. This is something I'm very keen to do going forward, not only continuing with the popular events we currently provide, but also looking at potential new ones to create excitement and anticipation throughout the town. Option 2 would cost BTAC an additional £16,250, as well as some external funding for some of the events. And a breakdown of this can be seen in Appendix B on pages 17 to 21 of your report. On page 9.4.1, this shows potential events at present from external providers, including the Indian Holi Festival, which was very well received by everyone last year. And also, for the first time in the town, we have Boston's Strongest, which has the potential to bring good footfall into the town centre and showcase something new. And we welcome interest also from external providers regarding putting events on in the town going forward. Events are very beneficial to the town, both now and for the future. For businesses, from increased footfall and custom, residents getting to meet up with family and friends to enjoy the mixed events together, and visitors coming into the town maybe for the first time, which will hopefully lead to them returning on a regular basis and telling other people about our great town. I'm also keen for the events team to continue to grow and forge strong relationships with businesses to create future sponsorship opportunities to help support the cost of running events going forward. This has already started with the sponsorship from listers towards the Christmas event this year, which we are very grateful for. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And now David, Rachel and I are very happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Councillor Broughton. Councillor Gleeson.
Thank you, Chair. This is a really exciting report. You know, has I think been shown by the sort of enthusiasm coming around the Christmas event. And I have no particular questions because I say actually it's quite clear. And to my mind, it would be a no-brainer not to increase our share of this to free up this other pot of money. And so I'm happy to propose that recommendation.
Do we have a seconder? Sorry. Seconded by Councillor Gilbert, but we need to ask any more questions first anyway, I think, before we move on that one. Any more questions regarding the paper? Councillor Woodliff.
Thank you, Chairman. I will support my colleagues anyway. I just think it's a pity that we've lost the bike night, Boston Bike Night. And I don't know whether there was any possibility of funding for that. I'm not a motorcycle rider myself, but it did bring people in from all around the country to Boston. It publicised the town. And I think it's a great shame that that has actually ceased, or I suppose lack of funding or lack of support. The newspaper articles are very critical actually of the town itself because of this. So I don't know whether there's any possibility of maybe extending the money or something along those to re-encourage it, because it does publicise the town. And we need to bring people in from outside, as people said. So I don't know what possibilities there are, but in our events, I think we need to consider things of that nature so that we bring people in across the country so people can really see what Boston's really about, rather than reading about it in the Daily Mail.
Okay, I don't understand why it was cancelled. Can you explain something why it was cancelled?
Do you want me to answer those? First I heard of it, Mr. Chairman, was on the Thursday last week. Immediately we got in contact with the organisers who said if we hold on, one of them wanted to retire. He was going to speak to his other colleagues. They had a press release ready and we asked them if they could hold back so we could try and get something. 2 hours later they released it. Since then I have had contact with a couple of people who's quite interested going forward, and these discussions are going to happen in the next couple of weeks. Also, the sponsorship aspect has come into the equation as well. So hopefully going forward, it won't be the end of Boston Bike Night, but I can't promise that at the moment.
It's a shame that those people did that because it gave a big negativity against the town again on the events. While we tried to build the events up and we're trying to get more people interested in doing activities in the town, that was a no-no, wasn't it? Really, it was a negative thing, and it's silly they did that. It's a shame. If we can revive it and we can bring it back, then obviously we could turn that negative into a positive. Well done. Right, Councillor Danny.
I was going to second the proposal, but you went to Gilbert. That's why. But it's fine. It's fine. Yes. Oh, thank you for your dictatorship. I'm going to call you something else next time. Yes, I will just, I think, yeah, I'm very happy to support the both propositions because I think it's about time for Boston to go forward. And I think a lot of people, they're not happy about what's going on, and we know that. And as you said, we need to bring positivity in people, and I will support the, whatever is proposed because it will make a difference. And I think we have to make a difference in this town. And unfortunately, things when they come like the cancellation of the bike night, everybody goes negative. Oh, Boston is going. However, these events, I think, will do us better. And I think if we can do something with the bike night, that will be good because we're going to have the vintage cars, if I'm not wrong. So that's, again, bring a lot of people. There's a lot of people who like cars. So I will support whatever it goes in this room as long as it benefits Boston. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Dorian.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'd just like to thank our fellow councillors for supporting option 2. That's my preference, Mr. Chair. And I think you're chairing the meeting very well. Thank you very much. I would like to get home today. So yeah, that's all I'm going to say. Thank you very much.
Councillor Gilbert.
Yeah, at the risk of just basically repeating what everybody else has said, I too think that Boston needs to sort of carve out some unique events. I think the beach event is a unique event. I think the bike night, whilst not unique, was very, very good, brought a lot of people in from all over the East Midlands. My understanding, having spoken to somebody yesterday, I think it was, about why they decided to pull out of the event was that there was too much bureaucracy and health and safety issues to be dealt with. And it's too time consuming for the people who organised it to get involved in all that. So maybe there's an opportunity for us to look at how we can support groups who want to put on events by providing some help in that area. So no, I'm fully endorse it. I think as long as the beach event goes ahead, alongside all the other events, I think Boston's really putting on a good show.
It's a councillor, isn't it? The bikers.
Yeah, well, it wasn't anybody involved with the bikers. It was just somebody who knows the group.
It's a pity that happened, though. Councillor Gleeson.
Thank you, Chair. I think the way forward on the bike night, obviously, I mean, Councillor Broughton's already shown that he's more than prepared to go above and beyond to get events into the town. We, as yet, obviously haven't set our budget for next year when the bike night will be. So I think the thing will be is when we come to look at our budget, if we have had some successful discussions towards the bike night, we can see what we as a committee can do to go towards it. I think there's obviously here a general desire to see it carry on. Obviously, it may not be possible, but I think that is the way forward. When we come to our budget setting, if they want to come to us through Councillor Broughton or with Councillor Broughton and say, look, we need X, Y, and Z, we can see what we can do to help. But this is coming from our existing pot of money. So we can look at this now and look at the bike night when we come to set a budget.
Thank you. I've got 3 things I want to mention, if you don't mind. First of all, going back to the sponsorship, I do believe that that's an area that there's an opportunity to be gained here. And I don't think this council or this area, we're not really sort of tapping into that. It's obviously, I mean, I've been involved with sponsorship for 30 years in different guises in professional football, but it's an area that if it's done properly, it's presented and packaged up properly, the benefits to each sponsor, you could have almost all your events sponsored. It's an opportunity for local companies and businesses to get involved in the community. It's good for their staff, for their morale, that they can see their business and their company supporting the community activities. It's good for their corporate social responsibility programs. All that is a plus. And I think we need to think about putting together some sponsorship packages, different prices ranges for different companies to tap into. But that's something that we can go into in further detail. The second thing is, what concerns me, putting on events is always a risk. And anything to do with outside risk is weather. Now, again, from my professional background in professional football, we used to cover all our outdoor activities, events, through insurance and risk insurance. So if anything went wrong, we were covered and all the costs were covered. Otherwise, you can run a massive loss in some of these events and you end up basically spending a lot of money for nothing. So my question there is, do we take out any risk insurance on any outdoor events where possibly the weather could ruin it? That's the question.
No, we currently don't do that.
I'd like to say that it's something that we ought to be looking at, because I do feel that you can spend a lot of money putting something on, and then basically the weather kills it for you, and then you end up with a massive loss. And one thing we don't want to be doing here is making losses on events. We want to be making profit or breaking even. And I do realise that all events aren't there to make massive profit. They're there for community purposes to actually get people involved. But you know, we want to safeguard ourselves against risk. And I would like you to look at risk insurance, if you don't mind, just in case there's a possibility that there might be something we can do there. And the third question, or the third thing I'd like to mention is, how do we monitor the success of each event? Because I think it's important that we understand how each event's performed, what's the return on the investment, what the feedback is from the public, how well it was attended, and the success of that, because they're the sort of stories that we're going to be able to build on and use for publicity purposes, and the communications team can have all that information out there. And all that, to me, is all part of turning this negativity of Boston round into a positive town borough, because of all the events, the community stuff that we're doing, the sponsorships if companies are getting involved. It's all good publicity and it's all good positive stuff. And bit by bit, you'll find that the public start to realise that Boston isn't the place that they thought it was. It's better. Thank you.
Just to answer that, I think we're looking at a combination of both qualitative and quantitative evaluation of events. Certainly the Christmas event is going to have, it's, if you like, the first huge event during the new arrangements within the council, and I think we're taking events forward a lot more positively, and that's really good. The Christmas event will be evaluated on a number of different levels. Transported are doing, they've got an external evaluator that will evaluate the parade. There's going to be a film made of the parade when it happens. We've got some Boston College of Further Education students who are going to do their own evaluation exercise on our behalf. So we're going to be looking at that in a variety of ways. I think there some events are about footfall, and we've got the what's called the Hook, I think, which is footfall based on telephones and everything. So you could actually look back on a year ago, and you know, it has putting an event on change the footfall. And I would imagine those figures are going to be quite pronounced when we come to the Christmas event over the next few days. So there are a number of ways that we can evaluate it, but be really happy to look at some other ways of evaluating it, and particularly where we're not simply looking at the footfall, we are looking at, you know, the effect it has on local businesses, the effect it has on certain individuals in the community, and people groups such as the families with additional needs children. We've had a couple of events that have certainly it's been small take up by those families, but they are, you know, they're really glad that we did those events. We're talking to the Mayfair providers about having a quiet 2 hours where the families can come and visit the fair without all the noise going, and that will be part of the programme for this next year. So
thank you. Very interesting. Or any sort of, it'd be good if you could get any sort of testimonials or people giving you praise. You can quote them in a press release, because I think the more third endorsement we can have, rather than doing it ourselves from outside to support what we're doing, the better, I think, and that's good for the council and the community at large as well. Councillor Gilbert.
Point. It will be very helpful to have some feedback from the stall holders for the Christmas market. I mean, they'll give an indication as to how profitable it's been for them actually attending. Thank you.
Right, we're going to move on then now to the recommendation. So I take it we're going for option 2. So can I just remind me again who is the proposer? Councillor Gleeson. Who was the seconder? Councillor Gilbert. All in favour? I think it's majority. I think, well, actually, unanimous. Got the wrong word there. Thank you. Right, so we'll go for option 2 then. And I'd like to thank Councillor Broughton, and I'd like to thank Rachel and David for the work they've done towards the Christmas event. I mean, the 4-day spectacular. I've got copies of the leaflet here. I'm absolutely, really, very great stuff you're doing here. I'd like to thank you on behalf of this committee and BTAC for all the work you've put into the Christmas event and all the other events that you've organised for the past and the future going forward. Can I have that recorded as an appreciation and thank you on behalf of this committee? Are we all in favour of that? Thank you very much, because I think you really have done a super job, all of you, and I really want to congratulate you on all the massive effort and hard work. Well done. Thank you. Okay, we'll move on to the third item in the update of the BTAC financial position, which is on page 23 of the agenda and is tabled for information purposes only ahead of the budget at the February meeting. Mr. Perry will present the updated financial information. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Yeah, remember, this is as I said, this is a report just for noting the budget setting will be in February, so where we'll discuss the next year's budget. So this is just a position statement to give you an idea of where the budget is at this point of the year, and if there's any sort of questions, just let us know. But otherwise, what we'll do is we'll have finance officers here next February to actually go through the budget and go through in detail. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Thank you. We'll move on to next item is round 3 of the small grants scheme, confirming which application been granted by the small grants group for round 3 of the financial year, and that's on page 29 of the agenda and presented by Mr. Perry.
Thank you, Chairman. You have table 2, which will give you the outcome and the working group's recommendations for endorsement, and members will also see from the document on their placements that there is an urgent need for additional members to volunteer to support the meetings of this group, and we'd like to ask if there are any other members willing to join the group, please. The process and details are on the placement, and it is a key provision of BTAC that we determine its applications on time.
Councillor Gleeson.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, going on to this about members, yeah, we struggled a little bit to have a meeting. Don't see why we can't be structured as licensing is, in so much as any member of the committee can be called to, to sit. So rather than people having to volunteer, tough, you're on it.
Are we all in favour of that? Anybody want to do anything different? Councillor Gilbert. No, but the meetings tend to be on Teams and they tend to be on a Thursday. Yeah, what we've been struggling with the people that's on the committee to get a quorum, and we've been struggling to get the numbers to run the meeting. So that's why we're throwing it open for other people to come along.
Yeah, I agree with Councillor Gilbert. I can't commit to every single Thursday, but if we were all on that committee and we all got an invitation to it to respond, then you would know if you'd got a quorum and whoever's available.
That's the idea. Everybody happy with that idea? Lovely. We'll take that forward. Is that okay with you? Right, so we go on to the next item. It's the work programme on page 35. Oh, sorry. Oh, you speak.
Sorry, Chair. Yeah, the group has determined the recommendation. It is just for endorsing.
Can we endorsing? Can we have all in favour? Can you all endorse it for me? Well, it's been scrutinised very heavily. Don't worry. Make sure of that. Right. So we'll move on then. Apologies about that. Page 35. I'll ask Mr. Perry to take us through that one as well.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, the next meeting is on February the 8th, and on the agenda we have the budget setting, Empowering Healthy Communities Grant Scheme, the wish list following the annual tour, and a paper regarding the Green Flag Award potential.
Any questions? Councillor Gleeson.
Just one thing I'd like to see on somewhere on a future work programme. I've been approached by some people in my ward about provision of dog bins, particularly upon Windsor Bank in my case. And I know that Councillor Marson has some issues in her ward. So I think if we could just have a paper on what we have, what it costs, so that we can then consider or not whether or not we want to increase the numbers of things. So no decision at the moment, just a more a background, how it works, how we do it.
Can you arrange that for us? Phil is going to sort that out for us. Thank you very much. Any other questions? Councillor Gilbert?
To make well, it's sort of a suggestion, really. People will be aware that a year ago or so, 2 years ago, I started a project with some members of the public to improve or renovate or repair the town boards. And we got some very bad publicity because the boards were in a very dilapidated state. I think we were on the front page of the Sunday Times at one point, and it wasn't a good look for Boston. Some of those boards that were renovated are still sort of in danger of going into a state of dilapidation. And I just wonder whether, as BTAC, given that we are responsible for first impressions of the town centre, whether we should have a specific item on, maybe replacing a couple of the old town boards, the wooden ones, maybe getting all of the town boards put into glass fibre so that they last for a lot longer than wood, because wood does require quite a lot of high maintenance. Otherwise, you get a bit of soil in there and you get some moss growing in it, and then before you know where you are, it's starting to rot. So yeah, it's just mindful of the long term, that the legacy, if you like, of that work that was done 2 or 3 years ago.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Gilbert. We'll put that down. Phil's going to make a note of that, and we'll get that on the work programme as well, I would imagine. Councillor Gleeson.
Sorry, something else that, because I'm getting old, I forget.
You're not really.
Then they come back in. As you see tonight, we are inundated with our interested members of the public, what we're doing. And I do wonder whether we need to start thinking about how we, as a committee, engage with our communities. I have historically been on a town council, so a large parish council. I mean, there we had an annual meeting where people could turn up and just literally ask questions. There was no need to register. You came up, and you had to be well enough on your brief to answer what was going on. I mean, that was a slightly bigger structure than we've got, but I do think it's important because at one level we actually have the ability to impact on the town more directly than the borough sometimes has. I don't think people necessarily realise that, and so I do think we need to start encouraging people, to interact with us as BTAC. And I know it because it's this sort of amorphous thing, but I do think it's something, again, in the longer term, we should be looking at how we do that.
I think we could probably ask the comms team to do some like press releases or information about the public coming to the meetings, because not everybody knows about that can come to the meeting, and the meetings are always open. BTAC meetings are open for the public to come along. And as Karen was telling me early on, normally when we have the police here, we have quite a few people in the public gallery. Tonight we've only got 2 of our councillors in there.
Yeah, no, I just think it's something, again, I think there is this new spirit within the council of trying to engage, of trying to be much more inclusive in how we work. And so I do think as BTAC we need to be looking at ourselves.
I agree. Is it possible to get the comms team to do something just to reiterate the fact that BTAC meetings and when they are, and it is there for the public, and they can come along and ask questions, and perhaps we could give people some idea of some of the topics that we're going to be talking about if they want to come along and ask questions. Yes, I agree. Councillor Woodliff.
Thank you, Chairman. We have tried something like that in the past, DIM, about 10 years ago, when we had open meeting for the Borough Council. Yeah. And anybody come along and challenge any councillor on whatever problem they want. The problem we have, of course, I think, is that many people aren't prepared to come out at night, and it's dark. I mean, taking a look at my ward, well, no one would come out at night. You can't knock on, if you knocked on the door in my ward, people never answer the door. It's not at night anyway. So we have a problem about when we meet, because if we meet at night, then we're not going to get many people along. And the other thing is, I think there is a reluctance for people to come out anyway. I don't object to any attempt to try and improve, the audience, if you like. I don't object to people asking questions and so on, but I think we'll struggle to get people out, whatever we do, because I think people just don't want to come out at night. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Noted. Councillor Cresswell.
Just thinking about that, I would be in favour definitely of having sort of an open discussion with people. I wonder if it would be an option to have half an hour prior to the official BTAC meeting starting, where residents could come along and ask questions, or indeed could they join somehow by Teams or on an open channel where they could ask questions to us, maybe for 30 minutes. So these aren't the questions that are submitted, these are just questions on the night that they could ask us, and obviously if we can't answer them we could obviously get back to them. I think that might be a
well, I think what we could do is ask Phil if and Karen if they could look into the fact that whether we could do a half an hour on a team system where people don't have to come out in the dark, as Councillor Woodliff said, and perhaps do half an hour of questions on anything to do with BTAC and the various wards that are in the BTAC area. I don't have a problem with that, and that's something we could investigate and look into if we can. Councillor Danny.
It's nothing to do with BTAC. I just want to suggest if you give us a question or two or three to ask next time, it would be appropriate so we can feel comfortable on discussions. If you don't mind, Mr. Chairman.
I'm not quite with you on that.
Or timing. I'm just talking about something different. Is because sometimes you tell us, oh, for a question or two or three. If we all can do 3 or 2 questions, it will be, so we don't fall in that gap.
And there's no fixed formula with my chairmanship about how many questions you can do. All I'm interested in is the questions, not waffle. So if anybody waffles, I cut them off and get into the question. And that's the idea of a meeting. You don't sit here listening to people rabbiting on for hours on end, because that's not on. In my view, a chairman is about keeping the meeting running smoothly, quickly, efficiently, effectively, and without waffle. Right, any more questions before we close the meeting? One more? I have noted your comments, Councillor Anton Danny. It's very kind of you, and I shall make sure that I will try and give people plenty of chances to ask questions.
Back, Mr. Chairman, because now our meetings are registered and people can watch them. So if we're not efficient in our questions or discussions, then people might just take us for a negative way that we're not doing the best we can. That's all.
Put your microphone on, Councillor Gleeson. Put your microphone on. Put your microphone on so we can hear you.
I couldn't see any of that police presentation, any of the writing. So are we going to be sent copies of it? Yeah, thank you. That's all.
Yeah, they'll come out tomorrow. Do you want hard copies, or are you happy to take emails?
No, because I need to make them big on the screen.
Okay. Hard.
I suggest you send Karen an email tomorrow morning saying hard copies or whatever, or the PDF files or whatever they are, so that she can send them all out to you as per your personal instructions. How about that? Can I say thank you very much for the meeting this evening? Very interesting, very informative, and quite a challenging meeting, and I've really enjoyed it. Thank you very much. Safe journey home. See you soon. See you on Monday for the Audience and Governance meeting at Monday evening. Thank you.